Shock Monkey Radio is created by adults for entertainment purposes. The views and opinions expressed here do not reflect the sponsors or FXPG Public Radio. For additional information, refer to the U.S. Bill of Rights. Stand warned. Just dumb thinking about words and stuff like that. I'm an idiot. Drinking beer, thinking about words. Words are silly. Anyway, let's go on to this first story. The big story. Minnesota Police Chief Tim Gannon, Officer Kim Potter resigned after a deadly Daunte Wright shooting. Now, hopefully, if you haven't been living in a cave, you know everything that's going on in Minnesota, Minneapolis, particularly. Brooklyn Center, particularly. Minnesota Police Chief Tim Gannon and Officer Kim Porter have resigned after a deadly shooting of 20-year-old Daunte Wright, Mayor Mike Elliott announced today. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension identified Potter late Monday as the officer who was seen in released body camera footage firing a single round at Wright. Gannon said he made the call to release the footage and said he believed the female officer intended to reach for a taser, but instead grabbed her handgun, categorizing the incident as an accidental discharge. Minnesota authorities arrested about 40 people after rioters and police clashed for the second night in Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, authorities said during a news conference early Tuesday. Hundreds gathered outside Brooklyn Center Police Department Monday and defied curfew, and they demanded justice for Daunte Wright, 20-year-old black guy. Crowd shouted Daunte Wright and obscenities at officers. Authorities fired tear gas, flashbang grenades into the crowd after warning them that they were in violation of curfew. Some rioters retaliated by throwing smoke canisters back towards law enforcement, and that's always going to happen, when others launched fireworks at the police line, according to reports. Anyway, so if you've been following this story, you know what's happened. You've probably seen it. I don't know how much of you watch the news like I do. I hope you don't come here for your news. Oh, God forbid. But there's been a lot of things being said about it because first of all, I think it shows that Minneapolis is going to erupt no matter what happens in the Chauvin trial. It seems like crime is out of control in Minnesota. And I think it has everything to do with the governor and these municipalities what they've been doing with like defunding the police and stuff like that. Letting people out of prison, all during this COVID thing. You got all the criminals out on the streets. All right. And that's why you're seeing this big spike in crime. And if you've been paying attention, there's been a big spike in crime. All right. Now so I think you're seeing this. You're seeing a bunch of criminals, just being criminals. And, you need to establish martial law in many ways, order. You need to establish order in these cities. And so when it comes to this incident with this female, should be noted, police officer, who pulled her pistol thinking it was her taser, all right, and shot one round into Daunte Wright. And here's the thing about that particular action, her action in that is like, first of all, I think as an officer of the law, you should be able to know your taser, how it feels in your hand, as opposed to your weapon, your main, weapon in your hand. You should know the difference. Okay. I'm not saying it has anything to do with the gender, obviously. What I'm saying is that if the tasers are too similar in feel to the pistols that they use, their service pistols, that's a problem. There should be a different type of handle for that. If that's the issue, then yeah, that's something we could fix. All right. However, you should know the difference between the feel of a pistol in your hand and the feel of a taser in your hand. And so I think charges will definitely be brought up against this woman because if at bare minimum, it's negligence on her part. It's an accidental homicide, I think like murder, manslaughter 3 or something like that. Manslaughter. All right. You didn't intend to do it, but you did do it. All right. And I think that you were negligent on your part by not knowing that was a, live ammo that you're shooting at a guy. All right. So it's going to happen. Justice will come for this officer in the way that justice comes for everybody. People rioted when this incident with George Floyd happened. They rioted then. They didn't wait for the trial to play out. The trial is happening now. They're rioting over something else altogether. And who knows, and by the time this incident goes to trial, they'll riot again 6 months, a year from now, when it actually goes to trial. All right? So I think law and order needs to be established there in Minnesota, particularly in Minneapolis. particularly. Allegedly. And it's a damn shame that this guy got shot, but as far as I'm concerned, if you fight the cops, if you resist arrest like that, and you get killed, I mean, I'm sorry. That's the dangerous game you're playing. You fight cops, you're going to get shot. I mean, this cop was, I think, intending to try to do the right thing by using a taser in this very hot climate in a very hot area of the country where all this stuff is scrutinized so poignantly. I wouldn't believe that she would. I don't think there's anything malicious about it. I believe, she's probably a minority herself, I think. I can't remember. Like, I want to say Hispanic. I don't know. I don't think there's any racial involvement. I don't think there was any racial motivation for Derek Chauvin. I don't think there's any racial motivation here. What I think is what's happening is that, the criminals are loose on the streets, and every time, they, I hate to say it this way, but if you are a dark-skinned criminal, all you have to do is live stream at the same time. The next thing you know, you're going viral, and then people are rioting on your account. And, what do they do? What do they do in these riots? They're not peaceful protests. I think that one of the police chief, Tim Gannon, he resigned today because I think yesterday or today he said he called them riots. And the journalists were yelling at him. It's like, no, they're not riots. They're peaceful protesters. I don't know. Did you see that, EK? And he resigned. He just resigned. Because the media have become bullies. They become bullies. And they're feeding this fire of insurgency that is happening in this nation. It's almost like the media are daring the police to come out there with rubber bullets. Because if I were king of America, I would have soldiers out there on the street with clips and clips and clips and clips of rubber bullets of those 22. No, those 22 things. Those 20. They shoot like 1,000 rounds a second or something like that. Go. No. Exactly. We could use paint rounds, like EK says. But I'm telling you, I'd be out there with rubber bullets, plastic bullets, marking bullets, all sorts of stuff, and just laying into a crowd. Just laying into the crowd. Because it'd be so cathartic for the police and purposeful for those idiot rioters who are criminals. Rioters are criminals. Okay? I have no sympathy for them. Anyway. That being said, it's a shame this guy got shot. He, like Ben Shapiro says, the sentence for resisting arrest shouldn't be death, obviously. But, if you run from the cops and you get shot during it, and you fight or run from the cops and you get shot during it, it's like, that's the dangerous game you're playing. All right? Long arm of the law. Sorry. But, yeah, I think this officer should have known the difference. And charges will come up. You don't need to riot now. At least wait for a fucking verdict like you did with Rodney King. Wait until the justice plays out. You don't like it, then riot, and then you're justified. Now you're just rioting to steal fucking shoes. Because apparently that's what you do when you riot in these cities. Is like all the shoe stores get robbed. Anyway. Broadcast networks avoid calling chaos in Minnesota a riot, opting for softer terms. ABC World News Tonight and NBC Night News and CBS's Evening News opted not to call riots that took place Sunday night following the deadly shooting of 20-year-old Daunte Wright by a police officer by the dreaded R word. Violence erupted in the Minneapolis suburb in response to the shooting, which is Brooklyn Center. Minnesota Police Chief Tim Gannon suggested was a mistake by the officer who confused her gun with her taser and fired at Wright and attempted to drive off in his car. Demonstrations outside the Brooklyn Center Police Department grew violent as rioters threw objects at officers and several areas were looted, but the flagship newscasts on ABC, NBC, and CBS didn't refer to the chaos as a riot during Monday night's broadcast and only used the word to describe gear worn by law enforcement officials. Quote, the truth didn't matter to these broadcast networks as they gaslit their audiences, Newsbusters analyst Nicholas Fondacaro wrote. Forgive me if I mispronounced that. ABC described the riot as protest turned violent, while NBC used the term unrest, and CBS went with violent protests. At least they're, getting closer to the truth. ABC's David Muir even admitted police were in riot gear to combat what they called protesters. Okay. You put on riot gear when there's a riot. Anyway, so CBS reporter Omar Villafranca made similar admission, noting that a big crowd of protesters drew National Guardsmen and officer in full riot gear. Soft selling. The decision not to use the term riot to describe the events came after Gannon was scolded at news conference for uttering the word. Quote, "What was your decision to issue dispersal order when when they were peacefully protesting in front of the police station?" The reporter asked, before noting that CO2 canisters and gas were also used on the crowd. This is what Gannon said. "Just so that everybody's clear, I was front and center at the protest at the riot," Gannon began. Don't do that, someone interjected. "There was no riot," and said another person in the audience. This is insane. They're trying to control his statement. It was, Gannon doubled down. The officers that were putting themselves in harm's way were being pelted with frozen cans of pop. They were being pelted. It's Michigan. Minnesota. Yeah, it's up there. They call it pop up there. Frozen cans of pop. They were being pelted with concrete blocks. And yes, we had our helmets on because concrete blocks and frozen cans of pop. And we had protection and gear, but an officer was injured, hit in the head with a brick, so we had to make decisions. We had to disperse the crowd because we cannot allow our officers to be harmed. That's why they have helmets and riot gear. Last year, following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis police custody, NBC reportedly told his journalists only to refer the unrest in Minnesota as protests and not riots. Fonda Caro blasted the broadcast networks for downplaying the violence and softening the language used to describe it. "There's no such thing as violent protest. Protesters don't clash, and states of emergency are not needed. These are rioters," Fonda Caro wrote. "And cities don't need to call in the National Guard because they're on edge and bracing for another night of protests." Sad but true. It's yeah. I mean, I mentioned all this earlier, and this is just the article. I guess I did read this article earlier and just parroted it, my rant earlier. So anyway, so yeah, and so this guy, that police chief, retired today because he got bullied by the media. It's a tough position to be in for sure, to be the chief of police of that city during all this going on. Tough position to be. And, I think I would have, easy for me to say sitting here, but I would have manned up and tried to see my city through this, but I think that once you start apologizing to these assholes, once you start giving them any ground at all, that's when you're done. At that point, they're like, "Oh, he called it riots, not a protest." It's like, he's got to go. And then start whispering, "Hey, he's got to go. He should resign." That's probably what happened. All right. And that's not the way this country works. That's not the way this country should work. These police stations are obviously terrified of all these lawsuits and stuff like that. But at the same time, law and order is important. And the last place in America, other than Chicago, I want to go is anywhere in Minnesota right now. Sounds like a dangerous place to live. And I feel sorry for all those Americans, those peace-loving Americans who are not out there rioting in the streets. You're talking about maybe 20, 30% of the population is out there in the streets causing all this trouble. Maybe. I guarantee you that about 75% of the people living in these areas where all this shit is going down are just holed up at home with their guns close to their beds. All right? And that's why you need law and order in the streets. Because you're letting a minority dictate the entire population. That's not American.